Celebrating 70 years of Formula One racing, we have the 70th Anniversary Grand Prix. Team strategists and tire management were the key themes of this race. What are we talking about? Let's just jump right into it. Cass, for the first half of this race, how did it go for you?
It was a bit up and down. I mean, with Hulk starting in third, my hopes were so high, and then Max passed him in the start in the first corner. So, yeah, I went a little bit downhill from there, but as soon as we got the race, yes, it was his fault that he spun. He just put that tire a little bit too far on the curb and then ended up losing it. But to be fair, they didn't exactly do him any favors with the strategy choice that happened once he was able to recover from that spin. Because obviously the second the spin happened, you ruin your tires. He came in, they put him on hards, and he was only on them for 10 laps before they switched him to mediums, where it just deteriorated and he kept falling further and further back. It's like, what on earth were they thinking?
Speaking of strategy, you had one racer on a completely different strategy from everyone else that was set on Saturday in qualifying. So he was the only person in the top 10 starting on the hards, and boy did it ever pay off.
For Max to recognize that this could be a potential opportunity to pressure the Mercedes into changing up their strategy or have them make a mistake or wear down the competitors' tires, I think honestly smart move. Because eventually both Mercedes had to pit. Max was able to make those tires last so much longer than anticipated. Mm-hmm. And ultimately, it really played into Red Bull's hands.
That was definitely something that brought up my excitement personally, because I was just watching the gap between Hamilton and Verstappen keep getting closer, and you're like, this is unusual. Usually Mercedes just 3 seconds ahead, maybe racing after each other, which even wasn't the case at the start of this race. Valtteri got ahead and Hamilton was just behind him, so it almost seemed like it was going to be the same sort of scenario in the British Grand Prix. But in this case, Max was keeping up with them, and very happy to see him push and keep applying pressure, because let's be honest, Mercedes, once they're in the lead, they haven't had much pressure.
Something that should be noted, because, yeah, the entire race was based around the top three. A lot of the focus is on there, understandably, because this is the first time that we've seen another team actually be able to apply pressure, not just for a podium spot, but for the win. That being said, I feel like Albon's race was spectacular, given the fact that, his qualifying, once again, seems to be struggling on the Saturdays. But, oh my god, he just came alive in this race, and, with amazing overtakes on the majority of the field.
One of the other things I was very content about in this race was that we finally had a different team leading. It's been always a Mercedes, whereas this time you had Max carry away, brought up by sort of tensions deep down, because they did mention every year for the past 8 races there's been a safety car. So you were just here waiting for this maybe eventual safety car to give Max a free pit stop. Instead, he ends up going in, and this made me a little nervous because he made enough gap to be in front of Hamilton, but not necessarily for Bottas, and he had an even slower pit stop than usual at Red Bull Racing, that they ended up coming out roughly around the same time, and Bottas was actually able to get in front of him, which you mentioned it actually probably worked in Max's favor, because then he got DRS right away.
I also want to touch upon all the mistakes, or at least a few notable ones that happened in the first half of the race that I don't think were touched upon as much as they should have been. Like, what the hell was that whole thing with Magnussen just shouldering Latifi off the road? What on earth was that? And then, man, I don't know what's going on at McLaren with Carlos Sainz. He's just had a few horrible races in a row that really delayed pit stop again. He gets stalled in the pits for so long, and it seems like it's so difficult for him to recover after that. But, I mean, it's not like he had a very good weekend overall regardless. It just seems that out of the two McLarens, his car is struggling a lot more with overheating than Lando's.
So, at the halfway mark, you have Verstappen leading. Both Valtteri and Lewis are behind him. Tire managing. Everyone's done at least one pit stop. We're up in the air about, is anyone going to do a second pit stop? But up to this point, how would we score the first half?
I would put the excitement and drama the same. For me, they were roughly at like a 6. Evidently because anytime you see a Mercedes struggling, it's just like, what is going on. And seeing the potential to actually have a race winner that is not a Mercedes, like obviously that's going to get you a little bit more excited. The drama between the different strategies and drama with other teams with penalties and pit stops and spins, it just amped it up a little bit. But ultimately, I didn't really find anything crazy happened. And then with the racing, I kept it at just like a mid-level 5. I just found that a lot of the overtakes were purely because of someone being on fresher tires versus someone that was struggling on probably the mediums and was due for a pit stop. It was just a lot of, okay, yeah, that person's overdue for a pit stop and the other person's on fresh tires, so let's go.
It's to be expected. Yeah, I'm in the sort of the similar category. Most of my excitement came from just watching Hamilton and Verstappen, just seeing the gap. So I scored the excitement a 5. For the drama side, there wasn't overly too much happening like you said, so I would give it a 4. And then in terms of the racing, I gave it a 4 as well, because although I didn't see too much of it happening on the TV, there was a lot of good overtakes probably happening. The only real wheel-to-wheel risky racing you saw was from Albon.
Yeah, when calculating my scores, it comes out at roughly a 5.5.
Yeah, so that would score our first parts together about approximately a 5. Moving on into the second half, more drama just around pit stops. That's all this race was pretty much about. Tire management and pit stops. Was Lewis going to go in for a second pit stop in the end? How long can Verstappen last on these new mediums because he's going exceptionally fast?
Yeah, Red Bull had me worried at one point when they put Max onto the mediums, which only lasted for 6 laps before he was brought back in for another pit stop to go back out on the hards.
The scariest part about that was they pitted at the same time as Bottas, so it pretty much made me think that they just are starting from ground zero, and we know that the Mercedes is going to be faster than the Red Bull, or so we thought.
But other than that, I found it was a lot of same old. Albon, once again, with all these overtakes, and he put so much effort into overtaking Norris, just for Norris to pit less than a lap later. Albon on Ocon, and then Albon on every single other person ahead of him. And then, god damn it, Ricciardo, with the spin, just got on the throttle a little too early next to Carlos, and I'm like, but why? That was a really disappointing race for him to drop from P5 to P14. It's just, yeah, he said that they were really struggling with tire management, overheating today, and then obviously that spin didn't help. He had to do 3 pit stops instead of 2.
Most of my focus for this race was once again on the top 3. So once Max and Bottas both pitted for the second time to go on the hard compound, it left up for question what Hamilton was going to do. Was he going to stay out there? Or was he going to pit again? Fortunately enough, Hamilton comes in for fresher tires, and now Max is back to leading the race. Yeah, and I'm happy to see that Max was able to pull it off all the way through. He built up a substantial lead that he didn't have to worry about anyone like Hamilton pitting on a fresh set of hard tires to overtake him. Unfortunately, this wasn't the same case for Bottas, as when he pit, he didn't build up enough of a lead in front of Hamilton that we saw Hamilton eventually overtake Bottas.
But it's also important to note that by this point, Hamilton was on much fresher tires. Bottas already had a pretty significant blister on one of the rear tires. There was just no chance. There was no chance that he was going to be able to hold his position. I think Valtteri has every right to be pissed off at the team right now. Mm-hmm. The strategy call for him was not the favorable one. This is 2 weekends in a row where tire management has completely gone against him.
Begs the question of what would have happened if it was the other way around between the two drivers. Going down on the leaderboard, Hülkenberg has been having a clean race, unfortunately, aside from his start. He was running in P5 for most of the part. He was on the 2-stop strategy. Next thing you know, they randomly decide to pit him on softs. They later on mentioned that he was having tire problems. They
essentially thought that if they kept him out there, there was a huge potential that he may not have even made it to the finish line. One person that continues to surprise, Charles Leclerc. How the hell are you doing another top job? I don't understand.
One pit stop definitely helped him, which people didn't think was possible on this weekend. It also makes me just wonder how come it didn't work in the favor of all the other drivers that did one stop. You have Kimi and Ocon that did the one stop, yet we didn't see them significantly higher up the board.
Kimi, I think that can just be blamed on the car and poor performance. With Ocon after the race, he said it was very difficult, but he said, I think this was the best we could do this weekend, which is once again a bit disappointing considering that they looked so strong last weekend. So how could there be such a massive difference from one week to another?
It also begs the question for Gasly, who finished P7 in qualifying and then sort of just fell off the pace, I guess, this weekend versus last. In the end, Verstappen manages to hold off both of the Mercedes to take the victory. Great to see a new team on the podium, especially in a year where we thought it was going to be dominated by Mercedes. So for the second half of this race, how would we view it versus the first?
I actually put it a bit lower. There wasn't really all that excitement other than Max versus Bottas. How's that going to play out? But I really didn't find it all that exciting because, to be fair, we were getting pretty constant communication. So, I mean, good from the teams, good from the commentators that they were keeping us up to date. Maybe it was just me, but I didn't really have any doubt in my mind that Max was going to pull off this win just because it seemed like no matter what they did, he was covered on all bases. Even if Hamilton doesn't come in for that second pit stop, you've got the raw pace to catch him and pull this off. So I was like, he's got it in the bag. He's got it in the bag. Drama, average 5. Just because, is Hamilton's tire gonna explode? Yeah,
he was even worried about it. So we did get our typical Hamilton radios. Are my tires okay?
Magnussen retiring, Ricciardo spinning. But it wasn't anything over the top exceptional. I guess the most dramatic moment would have been as soon as Hamilton overtook Bottas. But once again, we saw that coming a mile away as soon as you essentially realized that the strategy was in Hamilton's favor. And then for racing, I down at a 4. Once again, it was literally just Albon out there. That's about it.
I scored the board across with 5s. The racing stayed pretty consistent for me, I thought, from the first half. Maybe a bit less, but still with Albon's moves, it was nice to see. The excitement was there just in terms of will the gap still be there or not. Pretty much falling down to pit stops, the drama. Once again, basic 5 strategy moves that just didn't make sense. So that was pretty dramatic. So, the final scoring for the CCF1 channel here for the 70th Anniversary Grand Prix would be a 4.75. Although, you might look at it and say, that's a pretty low score for a good race that we had. The reasoning why we had a good race is because we had someone new on top, but when looking at overall what happened in the race, it wasn't anything unusual that we're not used to. It's tire management and all dependent on pit stops. There was not too much racing that defined who was winning.
I still don't consider this a bad race. I mean, I will absolutely never complain about another team pulling off an insane strategy.
This is going to conclude this race review. If you'd like to check out some of our others, you can check them out right here.
Make sure to follow us on social media. I do all the live tweeting throughout the race. Keep up to date with us on Instagram, where we post graphics and other fun stuff.
Don't forget to subscribe on the button just below this video, and we'll see you again next week, la próxima semana, for the Spanish Grand Prix.